The storm hit with no warning. It came like a beast unleashed, swallowing the sky in a shroud of thick, black clouds. The wind howled, lashing against the metal buildings of New Haven, a colony on the distant planet of Thera. People rushed to take shelter, panic spreading like wildfire. The storm was violent, but it was only the beginning of something far worse. Bonner, a young soldier, had just finished his shift at the colony's defense tower. He was walking back to his quarters, tired, with the faint hum of the colony's generators in the background. But then, as he stepped outside, the air shifted. The wind, now colder than before, carried with it a strange, buzzing hum, like static building up in the atmosphere. His senses went on high alert. Something wasn't right. The sky above was turning darker by the second, and it wasn't just the storm. He stared up, confusion and fear creeping into his chest. The clouds weren't natural. They were moving too fast, swirling in unnatural patterns. Then, in an instant, a flash of light cut through the darkness, followed by the unmistakable sound of thunder. But this wasn't thunder. This was different. A deep, resonating boom shook the ground, rattling windows and buildings. The colony's emergency alarms blared, red lights flashing everywhere. Bonner's heart raced as he reached for his communicator, trying to make contact with his unit. "Command, this is Bonner. What's going on?" He shouted, but there was no response, only static. He sprinted toward the central hub, heart pounding. As he ran, the storm grew more intense, the wind now ripping through the streets, sending debris flying. The air was thick with tension. Something big was happening. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and suddenly, out of nowhere, several massive ships appeared in the sky, their outlines hidden by the storm's fury. Cloaked, unseen, until they weren't. In one terrifying moment, the cloaks dropped. Massive warships, unlike anything humans had ever seen, filled the sky. Their dark, sleek shapes loomed ominously over the colony. They were the Zoraxians, an ancient alien species known for their brutal conquest of worlds. Bonner had heard stories, but nothing could prepare him for this. The warships opened fire with devastating precision, launching bolts of energy that slammed into the city with explosive force. Buildings crumbled in an instant, dust and debris rising like a fog. People screamed in terror, trying to flee, but the Zoraxians were too quick, too powerful. Bonner dove for cover behind a pile of rubble, his ears ringing from the shockwaves of the bombardment. His mind raced. He had to do something. He reached for his weapon, a standard-issue rifle, but as he peeked over the debris, something caught his eye. A group of Zoraxian soldiers, unlike anything he'd seen before, were moving through the wreckage. Their black armor gleamed under the flashes of light, and their eyes glowed with an eerie green hue. They weren't just killing. They were capturing. Human males. Bonner watched in horror as the Zoraxian soldiers dragged unconscious humans into transport pods. What were they doing with them? He had no idea, but it was clear they weren't just here for destruction. They were taking something valuable. And the storm, the chaos, it was all part of their plan. Bonner's heart raced. He needed answers, but the more he looked, the more questions piled up. Herding their captives into transport pods, Bonner knew this was his chance. He gripped his weapon tightly, knowing that this would be the first of many battles to come. He wasn't going to let his people fall so easily. Not today. As he charged toward the enemy, a deafening explosion tore through the air, knocking him off his feet. His vision blurred, but through the smoke, he saw the Zoraxian ships moving higher, disappearing into the clouds. They were leaving, but not without leaving their mark. New Haven was in ruins, and Bonner knew this was just the beginning. The Zoraxians had come to take something far worse than just land or resources. They had come for something far more dangerous, something that could turn the tide of the galaxy in their favor. And they had begun with Earth. As the dust settled, Bonner made a vow. He would find out what the human male Nectar was, and he would make sure that humanity would not become the Zoraxians' prey. This fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days that followed the attack were a blur of destruction and chaos. The Zoraxian invasion had left New Haven in ruins, and the rest of the human colonies were reeling. The warships had come down from the sky like harbingers of doom, devastating everything in their path. The loss was immense. Cities, homes, families, all reduced to rubble. But amidst the rubble, there was one thing that remained strong: humanity's resolve. Bonner woke up in a makeshift shelter, the walls made from broken metal and discarded debris. He had barely survived the initial attack, but now he had a new mission. The Zoraxians had taken human males, and the word Nectar kept echoing in his mind. He had to find out what they wanted with them, and why they were targeting Earth specifically. He stood up, brushing the dirt and ash off his uniform. The air outside smelled of smoke and burning metal. The colony was no more, but the humans who survived were still alive, and they were not going down without a fight. A resistance was forming. People from every corner of the planet coming together, united by the common cause of survival. As Bonner stepped outside, he saw the damage firsthand. The streets were filled with soldiers, medical personnel, and civilians who were all trying to pick up the pieces of what had once been their home. The human survivors were scattered, some grieving the loss of loved ones, others trying to make sense of what had happened. But despite the overwhelming, "We can't just sit back and let them take us," Bonner said, standing up. His voice was loud, cutting through the silence of the room. "We have to fight back. We have to find a way to stop them from taking any more. We have to take the fight to them." The room buzzed with a mix of fear and excitement. Some were doubtful, others were ready to act. But Bonner could see it in their eyes. The same fire he had felt when he first picked up his rifle. Humans weren't going to just give up. They were survivors. They always had been. And if the Zoraxians thought they could take Earth's most precious resource and get away with it, they were in for a rude awakening. Plans were drawn up. The human alliance would strike at the heart of the Zoraxian operation. Their mission was simple: find the Zoraxian base of operations, where they were extracting the nectar, and destroy it. The plan was risky. The Zoraxians had cloaking technology that made them nearly invisible, and their ships were far more advanced than anything the humans had. But Bonner didn't care. He had seen what the Zoraxians were capable of, and he knew they couldn't afford to wait any longer. The resistance started to gather their forces, recruiting soldiers, engineers, and scientists to create the weapons and technology they would need to fight back. They began by reverse engineering the Zoraxian tech they had salvaged, using their ingenuity to level the playing field. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Bonner, along with a team of skilled soldiers, set out to infiltrate a Zoraxian outpost, hoping to gather more intel. It wasn't easy. The Zoraxians were ruthless, their robots patrolling the area, searching for any signs of human activity. The humans moved under the cover of night, using the shadows to their advantage. But the Zoraxians were closing in, and the tension was unbearable. Just as they reached the base, an alarm went off. The Zoraxians had detected them. Bonner's heart raced, but he knew they had no choice but to fight. The humans launched an all-out attack, using every weapon they had at their disposal. The battle was fierce, blasts of energy lighting up the dark sky, Zoraxian war machines clashing with human firepower. In the heat of the battle, Bonner felt a surge of adrenaline, pushing him forward. This was their chance, their moment to prove that humans were more than just prey. They could fight. They could win. The Zoraxians were powerful, but humanity had something they didn't: heart. And as the dust settled after the battle, Bonner knew that this was only the beginning. The humans were rising from the ashes, ready to take back what was theirs, and to stop the Zoraxians before it was too late. The first victory had been a small one, but it was enough to ignite the spark of hope. For the first time since the Zoraxian invasion, humanity believed they could win. The resistance had successfully infiltrated a Zoraxian outpost, gathered crucial information, and destroyed some of their equipment. It wasn't a decisive blow, but it proved the humans could fight back. And more importantly, it proved that the Zoraxians weren't invincible. Bonner stood with the resistance leaders, looking at the map of the Zoraxian operations. Their forces were scattered across the galaxy, but they all seemed to be connected to a central hub. If they could strike at this hub, the heart of the Zoraxian operation, it might cripple their entire campaign. But it wouldn't be easy. The Zoraxians had fortified their positions, and their ships were cloaked, making them nearly impossible to track. Yet Bonner knew that if they didn't act soon, the Zoraxians would have the upper hand forever. It was time to take the fight to the enemy. Bonner's team was made up of soldiers, engineers, and scientists. Each one of them had a unique skill set that made them invaluable to the mission. Together, they worked day and night, building weapons and devices that would allow them to fight back against the Zoraxians. They reverse-engineered the Zoraxian tech they had salvaged from the previous battle, learning to use their cloaking devices against them, and building their own cloaked warships. The humans may have been technologically behind, but they made up for it with sheer ingenuity. The plan was risky. The resistance had to get close to the Zoraxian hub without being detected. They would have to slip past Zoraxian patrols, sneak into their heavily guarded space stations, and plant explosives in key areas to cripple their operations. If they succeeded, they would deal a blow to the Zoraxian supply lines and throw their entire strategy into chaos. But if they failed, the Zoraxians would retaliate with overwhelming force, and humanity could be wiped out completely. Bonner led the charge, his team following closely behind. The cloaked warships moved in silence through the darkness of space, each one a ghost drifting between the stars. They stayed hidden, moving only when the Zoraxian patrols were far enough away. The tension was unbearable. Bonner's heart pounded in his chest as they neared the Zoraxian hub. He had seen the power of the Zoraxian weapons up close, and the thought of facing them again filled him with dread. But he couldn't afford to think about fear. His people needed him. As they approached the hub, the resistance teams split into smaller groups, each tasked with a different objective. Bonner's team would infiltrate the main facility and disable their communications, while other teams would target the Zoraxian power generators and weapons caches. The element of surprise was their greatest advantage, and they had to make every moment count. The stealth operation began. Bonner and his team slipped past Zoraxian patrols, silently moving through the dark, cold halls of the station. They were like shadows, invisible and deadly. Bonner's hand gripped his rifle, every step measured and calculated. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft hum of the station's machinery. They reached the communications center, where a small group of Zoraxian officers were gathered. Bonner signaled his team, and they moved in quickly. A few well-placed shots took down the guards before they could react. In seconds, they were inside. Bonner moved to the main terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he worked to disable the station's communications. His mind raced, but his hands were steady. With a final press of a button, the system went dark. The station was blind. The humans now had the upper hand. But their victory was short-lived. The Zoraxians had backup systems, and soon the alarm blared throughout the facility. Bonner cursed under his breath as the sound of Zoraxian soldiers echoed in the halls. They had to move quickly before they were surrounded. The resistance team fought their way out, moving fast and hard. Explosions rocked the station as other teams carried out their objectives, hitting Zoraxian power sources and weakening their defenses. The Zoraxians retaliated with overwhelming force, but the humans held their ground. The fight was brutal, close-quarters combat, hand-to-hand skirmishes, and blasts of energy lighting up the dark corridors. Bonner's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he fought alongside his comrades. They were outnumbered, but they were fierce. In the chaos, Bonner spotted a group of Zoraxian soldiers closing in on his team. Without thinking, he charged forward, his rifle raised. A burst of gunfire rang out, and a Zoraxian soldier fell. The rest hesitated, just for a moment, giving Bonner the opening he needed. He threw himself into the fight, taking down 2 more soldiers with quick, calculated movements. But then, a blast of energy struck him in the side, knocking him off his feet. Pain shot through his body, and he gasped for breath, struggling to stay conscious. His team rushed to his side, pulling him to cover. Bonner gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand. They couldn't stop now. They had come too far. With Bonner's guidance, the team pressed on, moving through the facility, planting charges in key locations. The explosions reverberated through the station, and the Zoraxians scrambled to respond. But it was too late. The resistance had struck a decisive blow. As they made their way back to their cloaked ships, the Zoraxian hub began to crumble. The once invincible station was falling apart, its systems failing one by one. The humans had done it. They had struck back, and they had won. Bonner looked out over the battlefield, his body bruised and battered, but his heart full of hope. The Zoraxians were powerful, but they weren't unbeatable. Humanity had shown that, in the face of overwhelming odds, they could fight, and they could win. The war was far from over, but for the first time, Bonner believed they had a chance. The humans had struck back, and the galaxy was about to see what humanity was truly capable of. After their recent victory, the humans felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. They had struck a blow to the Zoraxian Empire, and their morale was higher than it had been in months. Bonner, his team, and the rest of the resistance were beginning to believe that the war was winnable. Yet, as their success spread throughout the human colonies, a storm was brewing within their own ranks. The human resistance had grown rapidly after the attack on the Zoraxian hub, drawing in more soldiers, engineers, and even civilians eager to fight. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming their dignity, their future. They had hope again, something that had been nearly lost after the first wave of the Zoraxian invasion. But amidst this newfound hope, Bonner felt an unsettling shift. It wasn't something he could easily describe, but the feeling gnawed at him every time he entered a room full of resistance members. The first signs of trouble came during a strategy meeting. The plan was simple: strike again at the Zoraxian forces, disrupt their supply lines, and gain control of a key resource that would cripple their war effort. Bonner was leading the briefing, going over the maps and coordinates with his trusted officers, when a familiar face stepped forward. It was Captain Reese, one of the higher-ranking officers in the Resistance, known for his tactical brilliance and sharp mind. Bonner had always admired Reese's dedication, but lately, Reese had been acting distant, his eyes filled with a cold calculation that Bonner couldn't quite understand. "Bonner, I believe we need to focus on something else," Reese said, his voice calm but firm. "Instead of attacking their supply lines, we should target their leadership directly. We should take down their high-ranking officers. That's the key to ending this war quickly." Bonner stared at him for a moment, unsure of what to make of Reese's suggestion. It wasn't the worst idea in the world, but it seemed risky. A direct attack on Zoraxian leadership could provoke a full-scale retaliation. It could bring the war to Earth itself. Bonner hesitated. "We don't have the intelligence to make that kind of move yet. The risk is too high." Reese's gaze hardened. "Then we'll gather the intelligence ourselves. We have spies on the inside, don't we?" That was true. The Resistance had managed to infiltrate some of the Zoraxian forces, using human prisoners who had been rescued from the harvesting stations. They'd gathered valuable information, but no one had yet gotten close enough to target Zoraxian leadership directly. Bonner couldn't shake the feeling that Reese was pushing for this attack a little too eagerly. "I'm not saying we shouldn't strike at their leaders eventually," Bonner replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "But now is not the time. We need to stick to the plan. Strike at their resources, cripple their power, and we'll hit them when they're weaker." The room grew quiet as everyone looked to Reese for his response. He held Bonner's gaze for a long moment before turning away, his expression unreadable. "Fine," Reese said, his voice colder than before. We'll follow your plan. For now. But Bonner could feel the tension hanging in the air. There was something off about Reese's behavior. It wasn't just the idea to change the plan. It was the way he had pushed it so insistently, as if he already knew something that Bonner didn't. But Bonner couldn't focus on it now. He had a mission to complete, and he would need all his attention for that. The feeling of unease would have to wait. Days passed, and Bonner's team carried out their mission against the Zoraxian supply lines. It was another success, but the feeling of betrayal lingered in the back of Bonner's mind. He tried to push it away, but Reese's increasingly erratic behavior continued to nag at him. Then, the unexpected happened. One morning, Bonner was woken up by an urgent message. "We've been compromised," the message said. "The Zoraxians know our location. They're coming." His heart raced as he scrambled to get dressed and make his way to the command center. The room was in chaos. Soldiers were running around, grabbing weapons and preparing for a defense. Bonner tried to get a handle on the situation. How had the Zoraxians found them so quickly? As he approached the command table, he saw Reese standing with several other officers, discussing the next steps. But something about Reese's demeanor sent a chill down Bonner's spine. He wasn't panicked like everyone else. He was calm, almost too calm. Bonner strode over to him. "Reese, what's going on? How did they find us?" Reese looked at him with a cold smile that sent a shiver down Bonner's back. "You're asking the wrong question, Bonner. The question is, how did you not know?" Reese's voice was taunting, and his eyes held a dark amusement that made Bonner's blood run cold. Before Bonner could respond, the station's alarms blared, signaling the arrival of Zoraxian ships. The humans scrambled to their positions, ready to defend themselves. But Bonner's mind was racing. Reese's words were beginning to make sense. He had been too eager to change the plan. He had pushed them toward an attack that would have drawn Zoraxian attention. What if he had planned to betray them all along? In the chaos, Bonner tried to make his way through the corridors to the security room, hoping to find evidence of Reese's involvement. He knew he had to stop the attack, but Reese had already set his plan in motion. Bonner felt his pulse quicken as he finally reached the security room, only to find it locked. He kicked the door in, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, he found a shocking sight. Reese was speaking into a hidden communication device, his voice low and deliberate. Bonner's worst fear had been realized. Reese had been working with the Zoraxians all along. He had betrayed them. "You did well," Reese said into the device, a smile creeping onto his face. "Everything is in place. The attack will happen, and Earth will fall." Bonner's stomach twisted in horror. The betrayal was real, and it ran deep. He had trusted Reese, and now he was the one who had set the stage for humanity's downfall. But Bonner wasn't going to let this be the end. With the fury of his people behind him, he knew it was time to fight back, not just against the Zoraxians, but against the traitor within. The betrayal hit Bonner like a gut punch. For days, the reality of what Reese had done echoed in his mind. The trust he had placed in the captain, the unspoken bond they shared in battle, had all been shattered in one cruel moment. Reese had sold them out, betraying not only Bonner but the entire human resistance to the Zoraxian enemy. The implications were devastating. The Zoraxians were now poised to launch a final, all-out assault on the human colonies, and Earth itself was in their crosshairs. Bonner knew time was running out. The Zoraxians would attack soon, and they had the advantage. Their forces were massive, their ships powerful, and now they had the inside knowledge of human tactics. The traitor within had given them everything they needed to destroy humanity once and for all. But Bonner couldn't afford to let despair take hold. He had always believed in the strength of humanity, and that belief was more important than ever. Reese had underestimated them, and Bonner was determined to show the Zoraxians that no matter how many tricks they had up their sleeves, humanity would never go down without a fight. After discovering Reese's betrayal, Bonner had to act quickly. He couldn't allow the traitor to sabotage the final assault. With his team now aware of the treachery, they rallied together. The plan was to launch one final counterattack before the Zoraxians could fully organize their assault. They had to strike first, catching the enemy off guard. It was a desperate move, but it was their only hope. The plan was to hit the Zoraxian command center directly, the heart of their operations. If they could disable it, they could throw the entire invasion into chaos. But the Zoraxian defenses were formidable. It wasn't going to be easy. Bonner's team would have to infiltrate one of the enemy's largest warships and destroy its central systems. The odds were stacked against them, but Bonner wasn't backing down. He had come too far to give up now. The humans gathered their resources, putting together a small but highly skilled strike team. Bonner was leading the charge, with his most trusted soldiers by his side. They boarded their cloaked warships, hoping to slip past the enemy lines undetected. The tension was palpable as they moved through space, the silence of the cloak making it feel as though time itself had slowed down. Bonner's heart raced, but his mind was focused. They couldn't afford to fail. As they approached the Zoraxian flagship, Bonner's team prepared for the worst. The warship was massive, dwarfing anything the humans had ever built. Its black hull gleamed ominously in the darkness of space, like a predator waiting to strike. But Bonner knew this was their chance. If they didn't act now, there might not be another opportunity. The cloaked ships dropped out of stealth, and the human strike team made their move. The Zoraxian flagship's defenses were strong, but not invincible. Bonner's team breached the ship's outer hull with precision, silently making their way through the corridors. The Zoraxians were everywhere, but the humans moved with the speed and skill of shadows, taking out enemy soldiers one by one. Every shot counted, and every step was calculated. Bonner's team was on a tight schedule. They had to reach the command center before the Zoraxians realized what was happening. They fought their way through the ship, their bodies pushed to the limit. The Zoraxians retaliated fiercely, but the humans were relentless. Bonner's soldiers were driven by the memory of their fallen comrades and the knowledge that the fate of Earth depended on their success. They couldn't afford to hesitate. The resistance had already lost too many people. Bonner could already hear their voices in his mind, those who had fallen in the earlier battles, those who had believed that humanity could win. He wasn't going to let their sacrifices be in vain. When they finally reached the command center, Bonner gave the signal. They planted explosives around the central core, carefully rigging them to destroy the Zoraxian systems. But just as they were about to leave, a Zoraxian commander appeared in the doorway, blocking their escape. His armor was sleek, and his eyes glowed with a cold, calculating light. "You think you can stop us?" The commander hissed, his voice dripping with disdain. "You are nothing. You are weak." Bonner's pulse quickened, but he kept his composure. He didn't have time for speeches. The mission had to be completed. "You're wrong," Bonner said, his voice steady. "We are human, and we're not going to let you take our world." The commander lunged, drawing a sharp energy blade. Bonner's team reacted quickly, taking cover and firing in unison. The Zoraxian commander was fast, but Bonner's team was faster. In a blur of movement, they closed in on him, taking him down with precise shots. It wasn't easy, but they didn't give up. Bonner knew that if they didn't end this now, they would be overrun. The Zoraxian flagship began to tremble as the explosives went off. The ship's core imploded, sending shockwaves throughout the vessel. Bonner and his team raced for the escape pods, barely making it out before the ship was torn apart in a massive explosion. The shockwave pushed their cloaked ships out of the immediate blast radius, but they watched from a distance as the Zoraxian flagship disintegrated into space. It was a victory, but Bonner knew it was just the beginning. There was still more to be done. As the strike team regrouped and prepared to return to their base, Bonner couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck at the heart of the Zoraxian forces and lived to tell the tale. The war was far from over, but the resistance had dealt a powerful blow. The Zoraxians had underestimated humanity, and now they would have to reckon with the consequences. But Bonner knew that the final assault had cost them dearly. The sacrifices had been great, and many brave soldiers had fallen along the way. The victory was bittersweet, but it was theirs. For now, the humans had proven that they could fight back, that they would never surrender. The final assault had begun the turning of the tide. Humanity was still standing, and the Zoraxians would have to face the full force of the human spirit.